Kaito stood by the floor-to-ceiling window of his Tokyo office, watching the rain blur the city's neon heartbeat into a smear of cold, artificial light. At 28, he was the definition of success. A high-level professional with an apartment that overlooked the clouds and a lifestyle that others spent their lives envying. Yet inside the tailored suits and the calculated smiles, he felt like little more than a hollow shell. He lived with a ghost, a quiet, persistent presence that haunted the corners of his mind and the silence of his luxury car. It was the memory of a girl with a smile that could outshine the sun, a girl he had left behind in a different lifetime. No matter how many promotions he earned or how many prestigious awards sat on his mahogany desk, the cold, nagging ache in his chest remained. He was a man walking through a crowded world, utterly alone, anchored to a past he had spent a decade trying to outrun. His mind often drifted back to that final high school summer, the last time his world had felt vibrant and real. The air in their small hometown had been thick with the scent of cherry blossoms and the heavy electric sweetness of youth. He and Hana had stood on the hilltop, the entire world laid out before them like a map they were destined to conquer together. Under the canopy of soft pink petals, they had made a vow that felt as solid as the earth beneath their feet. "No matter what happens, no matter where we go, we'll stay together," she had whispered, her fingers interlaced with his in a grip that promised safety. At the time, it felt like an unbreakable law of nature. They were two halves of a whole, inseparable and invincible. That summer was colored in vibrant, saturated hues of gold and azure, a stark contrast to the monochromatic reality of his current existence. But ambition is a cruel and demanding master. When the news of a prestigious scholarship arrived, offering him a future in a distant country across the ocean, Kaito felt the sudden, crushing weight of his own potential. He loved Hana with everything he was, but he feared that saying goodbye would break his resolve and chain him to a life he wasn't ready for. So, he chose the path of a coward. He packed his bags in the dead of night and departed for the airport without a single word. No note left on her doorstep, no final phone call, no last embrace at the station. He fled from his own emotions, foolishly believing that if he didn't say goodbye, the connection wouldn't truly be severed. He convinced himself he was saving them both from the jagged pain of a formal parting, but in reality, he was only planting the seeds of a decade-long regret. 10 years slipped through his fingers like cold mountain sand. In the beginning, he would spend hours staring at his phone, his thumb hovering over the send button on long, rambling messages that apologized for his disappearance. He wrote hundreds of drafts, pouring his heart into digital voids, only to delete them all in moments of pride or fear. The longer he waited, the more impossible it became to reach out, the silence between them growing into a vast, impassable ocean. He watched her life from a distance through the fractured lens of social media, seeing her move on through the years while he remained psychologically frozen in time. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. The weight of those 10 silent years sat heavy on his soul, a constant reminder of the boy who ran away. The change came with a single unexpected call from a mutual friend back home. The voice on the other end was heavy with a gravity that Kaito hadn't felt in years. "Kaito, you need to come home," the friend said, the words cutting through the office noise. "Hana is still here, but things are changing. If you don't come now, you'll lose the chance to see her forever." The words were a physical blow to his gut. Within hours, he was on a train heading away from the neon lights and toward the quiet, snowy mountains of his youth. The transition from the bustling city to the silent white landscape felt like traveling back in time, each mile stripping away the armor of his professional life. When the train finally hissed to a halt at the old station, Kaito stepped out into a world of biting, crystalline cold. The platform was exactly as he remembered it, yet hauntingly different, the wood grayed by time and frost. He looked down the length of the station, his heart hammering against his ribs. There, standing near the far exit, was a figure. Even through the falling snow, he recognized the silhouette immediately. It was Hana. She was wrapped in a heavy coat, her hair catching the pale light of the lamps. She looked exactly like the girl he had abandoned, yet there was something fundamentally wrong. She stood with a rigid, fragile stillness that didn't match the vibrant girl from his memories. As he began to walk toward her, a wave of dread washed over him. The closer he got, the more he realized that the woman before him was a stranger carved from the same features. Her gaze was fixed on the white horizon, ignoring his approach, as if she were waiting for someone who would never arrive. Kaito stopped, his breath catching in the freezing air, realizing that this reunion might be the very thing that finally breaks him. The silence of the snow felt like a shroud, burying the boy he used to be beneath a layer of ice. Kaito took a final step forward, his expensive leather shoes crunching harshly on the packed ice of the station platform. Hana didn't jump or gasp at his presence. She simply turned her head with a slow, deliberate grace, her eyes meeting his with a chilling neutrality that felt heavier than the winter sky. There was no flicker of the old fire, no sudden rush of tears, or the desperate embrace he had secretly imagined during the long, silent train ride. Instead, she offered a polite, shallow bow, the kind of formal gesture one might give to a distant business acquaintance or a stranger asking for directions. The way his name left her lips was brittle, a word stripped of its former melody and warmth. It was a sound that made the successful man feel like a ghost, a trespasser in a life he no longer possessed. They stood there for a long moment, the steam from their breath mingling and vanishing in the freezing air, creating a temporary, fragile bridge between two people who had become distant, icy islands. They began to walk away from the station, not toward the warmth of a nearby cafe, but through the skeletal remains of their childhood haunts. The town felt smaller than Kaito remembered, the buildings leaning inward as if burdened by the cumulative weight of the endless snow. As they passed the old playground, he noticed the rusted chains of the swings and the faded peeling paint on the slide where they once sat for hours, dreaming of the world beyond the mountains. The vibrant colors of his memories were being overwritten by a gray, decaying reality that smelled of damp wood and forgotten promises. He tried to fill the suffocating silence with stories of his life in Tokyo, the high-rise boardrooms, the complex deals he had orchestrated, and the prestige that came with his name. He spoke with a frantic, nervous energy, trying to prove that his desertion had been for something worthwhile, something grand. But Hana's face remained a mask of polite indifference. To her, his triumphs were just hollow words about a world she would never see, a world that had stolen him from her. Every mention of his corporate success felt like a fresh insult to the girl who had stayed behind to watch the colors fade from her own world while he chased the sun. "I'm sorry, Hana," he finally whispered, the words feeling pitifully small against the vast frozen landscape. "I thought if I made something of myself, I could come back and fix everything. I thought I was doing it for us." Hana stopped walking and looked at him, a faint, sad smile touching her lips for the first time. It wasn't a smile of forgiveness or hidden affection. It was the weary smile of someone who had long since finished mourning a loss. She told him then about the years he had missed, the long, agonizing nights she spent caring for her ailing mother, while the desperate messages she sent him went unanswered in his climb to the top. She explained how she had kept writing for 2 years, pouring her loneliness into digital voids that she eventually stopped checking because the silence on his end was louder than any words she could ever write. She stayed because duty and love held her here, anchored to the soil, while he was free to chase shadows in the city. The burden she carried wasn't just the physical labor or the grief, but the crushing realization that she had been forgotten by the one person who had promised to never leave her side. Kaito reached out, his hand trembling as he tried to find the girl who had promised herself to him under the cherry blossoms 10 years ago. "Hana, please, I'm here now. I can change things. Give me a chance to make it right. We still have time to start over." He wanted to believe that his return could magically undo a decade of neglect, that their story could have a late blooming spring after such a long, bitter winter. But Hana stepped back, the distance between them suddenly feeling like a vast, impossible canyon. "We don't have time, Kaito," she said, her voice steady and echoing with a finality that shattered his heart. "I'm leaving this town tomorrow morning, and it isn't by choice. My family's land has been sold, and I have nowhere left to stay here. Everything is gone." Kaito felt a surge of panic, but the look in her eyes stopped the blood in his veins. "I'm not going with you, Kaito. I'm going where I have to. This was my last day in this town, and I only stayed this long to say goodbye to the ghost of the boy I used to love. That boy died a long time ago, and the man standing here is a stranger I don't know how to love." The finality of her words was sharper than the winter wind, leaving Kaito standing in the shadows of their past, realizing that the door he had finally found was already locked from the inside. He watched her turn away, her silhouette blurring into the falling snow, and for the first time, the weight of his success felt like a mountain he could no longer carry. The path to the hilltop was steeper than Kaito remembered, or perhaps it was just the heavy weight of his accumulated regret slowing his ascent. They walked in a silence that was no longer expectant or nervous, but funerary, as if they were following a casket to a grave. When they finally reached the summit, the ancient cherry blossom tree stood like a skeletal sentinel against the bruising purple of the winter twilight. It was here, under a vibrant canopy of pink petals a decade ago, that they had carved their names into the bark and their futures into each other's hearts. Now the wind whipped across the ridge, biting and cruel, carrying the sharp scent of impending ice rather than the sweet floral perfume of spring. Kaito looked at the gnarled branches and then at Hana, realizing that the sacred altar of their youth had become a cold monument to their shared failure. The promise they had made to never leave each other's side felt like a cruel joke told by children who didn't understand the gravity of the world or the entropy of human hearts. "I would have done anything to get back here," Kaito finally shouted, his voice cracking as the wind tried to tear the desperate words from his mouth. "I spent every waking hour in that city thinking that if I built a bridge of success, it would eventually lead back to you, Hana. I thought the money, the status, the sheer prestige, I thought it would finally make me worthy of the girl I left behind in the dust." He was weeping openly now, the hot, salty tears freezing on his cheeks before they could even fall. He wanted her to scream at him, to hit him, to show some flicker of the volcanic passion that had once defined their bond. But Hana only looked at him with a profound, quiet exhaustion that was more devastating than any anger. "That's the tragedy, Kaito," she replied, her voice barely a whisper, yet cutting through the gale with surgical precision. "You were building a bridge to a girl who stopped existing the moment you boarded that plane without a single word. You didn't do it for us. You did it to soothe your own fear of being ordinary. Your sorry doesn't fill the empty seats at my mother's funeral. It doesn't put back the years I spent wondering what I did wrong to make you vanish. To say you're sorry now is a profound insult to the woman I had to become just to survive the crushing silence you left behind." The realization hit him with the force of a mountain avalanche. He had spent 10 years in love with a frozen memory, a static image of a girl in a summer dress, while the real Hana had been forged in a furnace of hardship he had chosen to ignore. They stood inches apart, yet the decade between them was a chasm wider and deeper than the ocean he had crossed to leave her. Even as he reached out a trembling hand to touch her sleeve, he felt the invisible, impenetrable barrier of time. They were no longer the Kaito and Hana who had promised forever. They were two weary strangers mourning the same ghosts. The love was still there, perhaps, a dull and aching ember in the dark, but it no longer had a hearth to call home. It was a phantom limb, a persistent sensation of something that should be there but had long since been severed by neglect. As dawn broke, Hana turned away. She walked down the hill toward the bus that would take her from this town forever. Kaito watched her go, rooted to the ancient frozen earth. He understood now that some doors, once closed, are sealed forever. The falling snow erased her footprints and his past. He stood alone, realizing the greatest tragedy isn't losing love, but becoming a person that the love can no longer find.